All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for being here as we celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Marsy's Law for Kentucky. Exactly a year ago today, on November 3rd, 2020, Kentucky voters overwhelmingly said yes to crime victims. They said yes to supporting crime victims and ensuring that they have equal rights under our Kentucky Constitution. It was an absolutely momentous day for us in Kentucky, for those of us who have been crime victims, who have been the family members of crime victims, for so many of the volunteers and the survivors and the advocates and organizations who worked so hard to make that happen. It truly was a very joyous day. And today is as well. So I was really hoping that this year we were going to be able to have our 1-year celebration in person, since we didn't get to last year, but here we are. So I appreciate that all of you have still come here and shown up, and you're giving your precious time with us today, because that is certainly something that we value and we appreciate. So what we're here to talk about today is what's been going on over the last year. We've had a year with Marsy's Law, and there has been so much that's been going on, so much progress and positive change. And it's really, really exciting. Probably the biggest question that I get from folks when I'm talking with them out across the state is, what's been going on with Marsy's Law since it passed? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to walk you through just some examples of what's been going on. We know that there are people all across the state who have been doing amazing work as well. This is just to be able to highlight a few folks that that we know about are doing some great things, and to give some examples and ideas, and hopefully be able to share some resources as well. So what we will do is we're going to start, just to sort of set the tone for today, we're going to start with a very short video that we had made that really paints a picture of the progress that's been made over the past year.
Victims know that they have a right to be more vocal and point to Marsy's Law as a friend of theirs.
The fact that we have Marsy's Law now has re-energized and reinvigorated the conversation around what it means for a victim to have meaningful access to our justice system.
This is probably the most important aspect of a trial that Marsy's Law has gifted to survivors, because I don't know what I would do if I was not able to use my voice.
That changes everything for a survivor when they're given that power back to own that story and that situation.
Marsy's Law provides a meaningful experience for crime victims as they go through the criminal justice system. It provides and protects rights for crime victims at the constitutional level, absolutely making a difference here in Kentucky.
It's just so important, because as a crime victim, your life has been impacted more than anyone else. And to be able to be in the room, to know what is being said about you, and to know what is being said about the person who committed this crime against you, is so empowering.
People are having conversations about Marsy's Law. They're having conversations about victims' rights.
So we had a domestic violence trial, and the victim wanted to be present for the opening arguments. And so for the first time ever in Fayette County, the prosecutor asserted her right to be present. The judge ruled in our favor, and so that survivor was able to sit in, listen to opening arguments, and then testify. That never would have happened before we had the constitutional amendment.
The result of what Marsy's Law has done to the justice system is what that gift is in the healing process. It's allowed survivors to feel like they're not just tending to my perpetrator's needs, they're tending to my needs, they're seeing me.
And so being able to share their story and to have their voice heard as a part of that process is invaluable.
Respect is the outcome. That's what I'm seeing. The respect within the courts and the respect that victims feel.
Their voice is being heard, they're being prioritized in ways that they haven't been before.
That's what the constitutional amendment has allowed us to do. It has brought these conversations to the forefront. It's made victims central to the whole process and allowed us to start to have a paradigm shift.
We're going into a year now since the law has been passed. Victims don't feel shortchanged the way that they have previous years. And that's as simple as I can put it, as a person who's been an advocate for victims for the longest.
The needs of the justice system are often seen as being incompatible with the needs of victims. Marsy's Law is closing that gap. It's making it so that the system is better meeting the needs of crime victims, and it's making a difference in Kentucky.
And thank you to all of the folks who participated in that video. It really was, it's very exciting for us to be able to highlight the many different ways that we've seen Marsy's Law making an impact over the last year. So you heard in the video from Ava, so from a survivor who individually as a victim was affected by Marsy's Law. But you also heard Brittany talk about the way that the system is changing and shifting in ways that are allowing for more space for victims to be brought in from the outside. So that's really what I'm hoping you'll be able to take away from our panel today as well. So we have 5 amazing folks who have joined me here today who will discuss some of the ways that they've seen Marsy's Law make a difference over the past year. So what we'll do is start with some brief remarks from each panelist, just so that we can learn a little bit more about them and the work that they do day in and day out to support victims and survivors of crime. And I've also asked each of them to share from their experience and perspective, the ways that they have seen this cultural shift and heightened awareness of victims in the criminal justice system. So we will hear first from Denise Durbin. Denise is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Attorney General's Office of Victims Advocacy. She has 8 years of experience prosecuting felony offenses as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney, and she has served as the lead attorney for the Crime Victim Project at Children's Law Center, Inc. So Denise, thank you for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
There we go. Thank you, Emily. And thank you so much for inviting us all to participate today and be a part of this exciting anniversary. So we very much, you've been a great, just a shout out to you. You and Marsy's Law of Kentucky have really been a great partner. I'd say over the last year, we've, have more phone conversations. And so thanks for always reaching out and being a great collaborative partner at our office. Couple things that we've done over the past year, I will say, starting before Marsy's was actually passed in anticipation of, we did start a little bit of work. A lot of that was in partnership with the training coordinator within the Prosecutors Advisory Council in Kentucky, and her name's Susan Blake. She was really helpful with some of the stuff we did, but I'm going to show you a few resources that the Attorney General's office put out. There's a statute that actually requires the Attorney General's office to basically draft and disseminate they call it a pamphlet. I'm not sure when the statute was written, but we call it a brochure that details victims' rights. Well, as everybody knows, prior to a year ago, there were already victims' rights. They were called the Crime Victim Bill of Rights, and it was codified in a statute. So the brochure always existed. What we did was update it and revise it that would reflect the changes that appeared not only in the constitutional amendment in 26A, but also the changes that appeared in the statute that had already existed. And so that victims' rights brochure, I think Brian is going to, I'm sorry, is going to put that one up, but I can, there we go. And so there you see, you can find this at ag.ky.gov. There is a PDF version. Some people have difficulty printing from the website. If you email me, we'd be happy to get you a PDF version that's not on the website. But as you can see on the left panel there, this is one side of the brochure, is a very short list of, and trying to keep it tight because it is a brochure, we want people to know. But this brochure is helpful. It has to be distributed by statute to county and Commonwealth attorneys, which are the prosecutors in Kentucky. But through some grant funding we received, we were able to give it out directly to victims, and we provide it to any direct services that we provide at this office to crime victims, and also to other service providers, like you'll hear from some of them today. So one of the important parts that we added to this on this brochure is at the bottom left. On the left panel, you'll see rights afforded to crime victims by Marsy's Law work in conjunction with, and that's the statute there. That's a good reminder, especially to those of us who work as criminal justice system professionals, that these aren't the exhaustive rights. There are a lot more, and they've existed for quite some time. And so that while it is at the bottom there, it's no less important that, hey, there are other rights and that we need to pay attention to as well. The second resource is called, we just call it the Marsy's card. There's other states who already have passed Marsy's Law who had this. I think California might have had a version of it, and I want to say South or North Dakota, but I could be wrong on that. And so this was actually designed, you'll see it's a duplicate. There's 4 to a page. So it was, cost effective for agencies like law enforcement agencies to print, because again, this has the same rights that you found in the brochure, but when you print it 2-sided, you can actually see the second page here, where the person who might have first contact with it, it could be a forensic nurse at a hospital, but it could be a law enforcement officer, it can be a prosecutor, and right there is a place to write in the prosecutor's office that might be handling the case. That's part of our job, is to make sure that that victims are not running around the system trying to figure out who the heck they're supposed to even contact, having a more direct line to the person who might have the answers that they're looking for. So those are 2 of the resources. We've done some training for victim advocates and prosecutors at the Kentucky Prosecutors Conference and also at Cape Kentucky Victim Assistance Academy. We are currently working on FAQs, or the frequently asked questions. There is a Marsy's Law working group that is just state agencies that might have obligations under Marsy's Law. And we hope to have those out soon once it's fully reviewed by the group. That's going to be more, again, Ohio has a great set of FAQs. We're sort of looking at what's worked in other states to see what is helpful to clear up confusion. If there's some professionals have questions about, what rights are included. And just a few other things. On our crime victim resource line that anyone is welcome to call. We've been, what an important part of that is talking about, we obviously can't give legal advice on that line, but what we can do is inform callers of their rights, refer them to the statute and to the constitutional amendment. We can send them our brochure. That's a great way to connect people with information about their rights, and then also technical assistance to professionals. We get lots of calls across the state that, hey, this is the situation. What do you think Marsy's Law requires? And again, we can provide guidance, can't provide any legal advice, but we're trying to do what we can to get the word out in the year since we've had it. Thanks, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Denise. There has been so much that has been coming out of your office, and we really, really appreciate everything that you've been doing and the great partnership that we have formed. Just to make sure that everyone is clear, both of those resources that you shared that are on the website, anyone in the state can and should access, right?
That's exactly right. And if we do have some printed copies, and so we'd be happy to send them to anybody given the version of the copies we have through that grant funding, we were able to get some printed, but if you shoot me an email and we can send some out to you.
That's great. That's a big part of really what we were hoping to be able to share today. A lot of the questions that I get from folks as they're going through this, they'll say, I need to put together a brochure. I need to put together, a notification card. And it's like, there's already one that's been put together that you're welcome to use. And so really just making sure that people know what kinds of resources and things are going on. That's great. So thank you so much, Denise, for sharing that. Okay, Layla, we'll hear from you next. Layla is the staff attorney with Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs. She provides legislative advocacy, technical assistance, and training on sexual violence issues. Layla, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here with the other panelists. And before I jump in, I also want to give a shout out to the many voices who worked on this issue, who are not panelists, but their voices, without their voices, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I know that that's a lot of folks around the Commonwealth, and I just want to say thank you for that as well. So I will start by telling you a little bit about who we are. We call ourselves KSAP for short, so you don't have to say that full name. And KSAP is the statewide coalition of Kentucky's 13 anti-sexual assault programs. At the state level, we provide assistance to our programs. We also advocate for statewide improvements, including policy changes and systems changes, and we coordinate prevention efforts. The regional programs on the local level, they provide direct services to individuals who've been sexually assaulted, harassed, or abused, as well as the friends and family members of them who may also want support. And some of the services, I'm just going to give you a handful of them. There are a lot, and it does depend on the program, but some of the services include responding to the hospital emergency department if a patient reports that they were sexually assaulted or abused, providing support for clients in court, police, or legal settings, providing counseling, therapy, helping clients just understand their rights in a multitude of settings, and making referrals, a 24/7 support line, and more. So that's just kind of a summary of what the local programs can offer to those folks. And we also understand that people who are harmed, not everyone doesn't want to engage in the criminal system, but what we do know for those people who want to engage, that Marsy's law adds another layer of protection for them. And we do have a long road. Emily mentioned this cultural shift, and we know it. We have a long road for that, but we have started it. And what we've been able to see through our advocates, they see this heightened awareness of the system, just thinking about these victims' rights and trying to ensure that they are doing what they're supposed to do and really just doing what's right. It might be the law, but it's also what's right. So some of the things that we've done at KSAP, and I know there's another follow-up question, so I won't go into too much detail, but some of the things that we've worked on is we've been able to share those rights with our advocates, as well as victims who have contacted us. We can let them know, here are your rights, so they know what they can try to assert, whichever rights that they're looking to have. And we've also been able to talk to attorneys to make sure they know there's this thing called Marsy's Law, and there's another added layer that you need to know so you can help clients. And then long term, we really hope to see Marsy's Law help reduce re-traumatization for individuals who engage in the criminal system. We also hope that it will provide them a meaningful voice, which we have seen happen already. And we want people to feel empowered within these systems, because we know it's so difficult to go through. And I think that's sort of where I'll wrap up for now. And for folks, just if you have questions, follow-up questions for our agency, there will be contact information available as well.
Thank you, Layla. That's wonderful. Okay, Brittany, you're up. Brittany is the Director of Victim Services at the Fayette County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. She specializes in adult sexual assault and domestic violence cases, and we are thrilled to have you here. So welcome, Brittany.
Hi, thank you for having me. So at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Lexington and Fayette County, we started having the conversation before Marsy's Law was passed, and I think that was really helpful to get everybody around the table in Lexington and see how we were collectively going to implement this as a team and a community, not just one single agency trying to execute this. And so we had meetings with the police department and county attorney and other partners, and everybody was really receptive to what we need to do to fulfill our obligations, and not just our obligations, but how we can really make things better for victims. And so, the Marsy's card that Denise had, our police department, within 24 hours of us talking to them, had updated their forms on their website and their intranet, and so that every single crime victim who files a police report gets the card that has all of the rights enumerated on it. And so same with our other community partners, everybody's really receptive. We updated things on our website. And one really good thing about it is those things needed attention and needed to be revisited anyway. So it was a good opportunity to just look and see, okay, how can we make this better? We probably need to revisit that periodically to make sure that it's serving the purpose. And so we did a bunch of trainings within our own office on how we would approach things and how we were looking at each of our processes to make sure that we were not missing anything. And we have, like Denise said, since 1985, and Ray Larson in our office have been paying a lot of attention to crime victims and their rights. But I think this is just another tool in a prosecutor's toolbox to be able to stand up for victims and try to seek justice and a meaningful participation for them. So there's a lot of things that we've been doing, but one of the most helpful things I think is just the partnerships and relationships that we've been building and having these conversations at the front of mind rather than an afterthought. So the prosecutors that I work with have been very receptive and excited to have another opportunity, another tool in their toolbox to be able to help victims.
Thank you, Brittany. And what a perfect setup for our last panelists. So we have both Jennifers here with us today, Jennifer Lanhard and Jennifer Brown, who are here to discuss with us how Madison County is using the Blueprint for Safety framework in their Marsy's Law implementation efforts. I will turn it over to you to describe the Blueprint and how you have been using this framework. And so take it away.
Well, thank you for having us, because we too are very appreciative to be a part of this conversation. And Jennifer and I are representing our Blueprint team, because that team is made up of a lot of different agencies in our community. We're talking about 911, all of the law enforcement agencies in our community, the prosecutors, both prosecutors' offices, the detention center, probation, parole, pretrial. So we're a large team, and we committed several years ago to addressing the crime of domestic violence in Madison County at a different level than what we were doing. We wanted to do that a little bit more successfully, and we found this wonderful model out of St. Paul, Minnesota, called the Blueprint for Safety. And we wrote a grant and became a Blueprint community. And what the Blueprint has allowed us to do is come together as a team and really just, focus on making our criminal, legal, and justice system a little more cohesive and less fragmented, so that victims don't feel overwhelmed or out of sorts when they're reaching out for that help that they really desperately need. We want to address that crime. We want to be able to prosecute the crime of domestic violence more effectively without relying on victim testimony, because we know that that can often be hard to get, and hard for victims too, if their perpetrator doesn't get the punishment that they're hoping for. So we're really committed to that, and we're committed to working as a team, and working as this team really kind of laid the groundwork for us to kind of figure out how we want to distribute Marsy's Law to crime victims in Madison County. Much like you guys in Fayette County, we came together collectively, and we, got to meet with you, Emily, and learn a little bit more about Marsy's Law. And I think that day we committed to getting back together and figuring out how we can make sure that the information is distributed to victims of crime. And we did just that, and found that one of our law enforcement agencies was, had this excellent process that they were already doing. And so all of the law enforcement agencies agreed to come together as one, so they could kind of hash that out and make sure that all of them are distributing the same information the same way and documenting that they distributed that information. The prosecutors' offices are coming together. I don't know, maybe they have already. Jennifer, you can answer some more of that. But they committed to getting together to make sure that they are also distributing that information the same way. So everything is very cohesive and not so fragmented. Jennifer, am I leaving anything out? Is there anything that you want to add?
I think the blueprint sort of set us up to be uniquely prepared to address Marsy's Law across the board, because we were already working together. We already had these relationships formed. We're already having regular meetings. So it just gave us an opportunity to, I feel like we had a little bit of a head start because we have such a great group of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. The Blueprint for Safety framework in general, but especially what I have seen coming out of Madison County is just absolutely incredible. The way that it really focuses and emphasizes on the system collaborations and coordinating those agency responses, as you all heard just now, is incredible. And it's across the criminal legal system, right? So identifying and outlining each practitioner's role and responsibility in that, so that there's a unified response. It was a pretty incredible day when I got to go and meet with the Blueprint team to see folks from every different component who were sitting there, all in the room, socially distant, and to say, okay, where is it that this is going to fall to us? Where is it that this is going to fall to you? Where can we make sure that it falls in two different places, so that way we kind of create a safety net. So I am excited to hear a little bit more from you all. I have some follow-up questions for you too.
Great.
Okay. Well, thank you, all of you, for again, for being here and for the incredible work that you're doing. I'll start with some follow-up questions, but I hope that you just sort of chime in and we'll keep this a conversation. So we heard from a lot of you about sort of the implementation, specifically implementation. Is there anyone who would like to share any additional implementation efforts or things that you've been doing to incorporate Marsy's Law in the work that you're doing? Layla, I know you have some specifics.
Yeah, I'll add a couple other things. So, and also to put in perspective, KSAP's work with Marsy's Law goes back to the beginning of when it came to Kentucky. So we were advocating with Marsy's Law at the state legislature both times that it passed, right? So we have been talking about implementing not just in the last year, but in those previous years as well, in particular with our advocates at the programs. So we do have what's called the Advocates Network that's made up of the Rape Crisis Center or the Sexual Assault Program staff who are the advocates serving clients that we meet monthly. And in fact, today, and this isn't exactly about Marsy's Law, but connected, we had a guest speaker come and talk to the advocates about how good time or any time in probation and parole are calculated into a sentence, because what one of our advocates asked about was, if my client is asking me, when is this person going to be when are they going to be released? And then they get released sooner than what their sentence was, how do I explain that? And so I said, well, let's bring in someone. So we actually had a guest speaker come in and talk about that today. So that's just one aspect of this, how things are interconnected in the criminal system. And that does impact victims' rights. Like, do they even understand that? How do we make sure they're fully informed? And so one of the ways that we try to help implement Marsy's Law is really just expanding folks' knowledge about it. And so at the Advocates Network is one place where we do that. We've also had some interactions with survivors in particular who are asking about their rights. And so around a couple issues I've worked on recently, one would be prosecutor declined my case. Do I have any rights? So we talked about that. And I'm drafting a document. It's still in draft form, but will be finalized by the end of the year because it needs to be marked off my calendar. But it's a handout that will be available on our website. Anyone else can add it to theirs if you like. But it's just the little ideas of not only what the law says your rights are, but then what are some other things just to be able to take care of yourself that you might want to look at or consider. And then the second thing was around felony mediation. And with that example, the process is confusing. The best practices for using that type of a felony mediation with sexual assault crimes is unique and mostly unknown around the state. And then how prosecutors and mediators even use felony mediation varies, right? So survivors are like, well, what does this mean? What are my rights? And that's another issue that at KSAP we've been able to work on with a couple survivors. And this issue was even around before Marsy's law, but now we're able to cite to this law to say, here are some other things that you might want to consider because these are your rights. I think that kind of sums up a few of the extra things I wanted to make sure to share with the group, because there are so many ways that we can implement this, I guess, in a sense. And I think it's just so much bigger than this word implement, because it's about education and knowledge and empowering folks to be able to enforce whatever right it is that they have and they want to enforce.
Absolutely. Thank you, Layla. I love those examples as reminders for folks that Marsy's law at the very core is about ensuring that victims have meaningful access to the criminal justice system, right? And so that happens in a lot of different ways. A lot of it is through education, through ensuring that we, write into policies and guidance and best practices, the role that Marsy's law will be able to have in that. So I really, really love the way that the examples that you gave are able to kind of remind folks that this is not just about, necessarily not just about, making sure that somebody gets a Marsy's card, right? So thank you for being here and sharing those examples. Brittany, did you have any extra examples you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I have several case examples if you want me to go for it now. I have one sexual assault survivor who wanted to speak at sentencing, and it's not as customary in Fayette County that a survivor would be able to speak at their sentencing as it is in other counties, I'm told. So the prosecutor asserted that right. The judge agreed that she had the right to speak at sentencing, and she was able to do that. And I think that was a pretty big deal for us and for her. And she talked about that experience afterwards as being kind of the culminating moment and everything for her in the criminal justice system, that 5 minutes that she was able to talk to the judge, because throughout a whole 3-year case, she had never been able to really speak. And so being able to be heard at sentencing was, she thought that it was a healing moment. And so that is I think that one of the survivors in the video said that it was a gift. And I really think that survivor felt like that was a gift to her, to have that moment to kind of take back power and be heard in front of her, in front of the man who assaulted her, that you could really see a change in her and how she felt about the case and the system in that moment. We had a domestic violence trial, because we're just now starting to have trials again. So we had a survivor who wanted to be in a domestic violence trial, be present in the openings. And I think I talked about this in the video too. And it's just, we're having these conversations and the prosecutors are asserting their rights, and it's happening. And so there's several case examples where it's been different outcomes than it would have been before. And so I think part of that is, like I said earlier, just having another tool in their toolbox to be able to assert a victim's rights, whereas before maybe it was just less clear what that would look like. And can we do this? I don't know. And I think that we're seeing that the sky isn't falling, and dockets aren't 10 hours longer. So it's not having this tremendous impact that some people were worried that it would have. But the instances where a survivor is able to be heard has a tremendous impact for them in their life. And so that's what we're hearing from survivors, and prosecutors are filing motions. A lot of it is still kind of yet to be determined what it will look like, and are we going to get decisions and case law and all of that. But I think that where people are feeling more comfortable now that this is kind of a journey and a process, and we're working through it. And the change is sometimes incremental, sometimes we move a lot faster than we thought we would, but overall, we've had some really good examples and success stories from victims feeling heard and engaged. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they like the outcome of the case, or that what they wanted to happen happened, but just more of the procedural justice piece of being able to participate. And so, yeah, our prosecutors are filing motions and our judges are doing research and listening. And so it's,
and I mean, amazing, right? That is exactly the hope of Marsy's Law, that it will just create enough of a paradigm shift that victims are remembered in these conversations, right? That victims have a voice, that we remember that there's a person behind this. It's just, I have chills, Brittany, when you talk about that. That is exactly what the hope is with Marsy's Law, and what we know will happen if we protect rights at the constitutional level. And so to see in just a year that that's happening, it's wonderful. Jennifer, did you want to say something?
Just what you said, that, a year ago, we weren't talking about this. I mean, there were a handful of us who were thinking about it, and everybody else was just kind of waiting to see what was going to happen. And what I've noticed is now it's a part of our conversation. It's a part of everybody's conversation when you're talking about the case. And I hear Marsy's Law from our judges, Marsy's Law from our prosecutors, even our defense attorneys are now starting to, they have that in their mind. If it's a bond motion, they know that the prosecutor is going to have spoken with the victim. And that's something that used to be done without that happening most of the time. And so it's just become a very common word that all of us are using. I love it. Every time I hear anybody, a clerk, a judge, a police officer, somebody at the jail mention Marsy's Law, it's just, it's amazing because it's been 1 year. So imagine in 5 where it will be.
Oh, can't wait. I can't wait. That's great. Thank you so much. Denise, how about you?
I was just sort of going to echo what Jennifer said. And, Layla and Brittany did, I thought, a great job of talking about how the impact almost on victims and survivors, and like how Marsy's has impacted their lives. But I think what Jennifer brought up is something that, maybe was an unintended consequence, maybe an intended consequence, is the impact on the professionals, the people in the system working, is, it's, I think, the awareness and acknowledgement that victims are more than witnesses in a case. And while they may not be, as we know from Marsy's, and we just know just from how our criminal system works, they're not a party to the case, but that doesn't mean that they are simply somebody who heard or saw something or has information that can be provided to a jury. They are just a much larger role than, they play a much more larger role than that. And, not everyone's offices, unfortunately, even though it's, much fewer, are where Jennifer comes from, or where Brittany comes from, in the system of, of being very thoughtful and mindful about these rights that, and a lot of them have been around for a long time. And so seeing the people that might have been a little more reluctant in the system, kind of like Jennifer said, talking about this, I think that's one of the best things, is that it's finally bringing people on board to say, no, like these people have a right to be heard. They have a right to know what's going on. They have a right to, consult with the prosecutor and have their safety considered and have their privacy considered. Finally, maybe we'll get people not putting victims' names in public pleadings in adult court. I don't know, maybe. And, just all those things, like constantly, you hear it, like Jennifer said, you hear it in court. Someone the other day said that the defense had asked if the victims would be present at sentencing, and the court was reminded that that whether anybody wants to or not, if it was part of the plea agreement, they have that absolute right to do so. And so if whatever that means by scheduling as much time as you need, the court needs, because it's a constitutional right. So I think that's, part of one of my favorite parts about it is bringing us and the system professionals along.
I love that, Denise. One of the biggest questions that we would get prior to passage is about why it needed to be a constitutional amendment. And this, I think, is a big part of that, right? That when we have constitutionally protected rights, we protect them at a different level, in a way that is protected across the board in a much more fair and equal way. And so I think that's a really great example of the outcome of that. Okay. Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead.
Just want to take a second to brag on our sheriff's department. We touched on it just a little bit, but I will tell you that, and they came up with this all on their own. What they do now is just the Marsy's cards that the AG's office has on the website. They printed those out, and every time a deputy responds to a call where there's a victim, he's required to go over the Marsy's law, provide them that card, but he also has to document it in his report. And so when a supervisor reviews the report, they're looking to see, did he, is it documented that he did it? If it's not, it gets rejected. They have to go back, make sure that they did it, fix the report. And that's some accountability that really they have taken it upon themselves, but it's a pretty big deal for a law enforcement agency. You never want to add work, but they've done it. And because they've done it, I think now our other agencies are also looking at how they can implement that. It's simple enough, but the deputies now, you'll get a report and it will say Marsy's law information provided to the victim. And it's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you'll just keep talking, actually, I'd love if you all would share more about the blueprint and how this is working for you. I know there's a lot of questions about the logistics of what this looks like. And so any insight you have, we'd love to hear it.
Well, the blueprint, came to Madison County probably, I don't know, Jen, it was probably like 5 years ago. And quite honestly, we stumbled upon it at a training that a victims advocate at Hope's Wings, Suzanne Howe, was at. And she came back and she was like, there's just this really awesome model that I got to listen to at this training. And do you think we can do it? And, the answer to that question was kind of like, geez, I don't know, because it means we've got to get a lot of people on board and a lot of partners. But that's what we started to do. We went to individual agencies and community partners in that criminal legal system and said, hey, what do you think? Do you think we can work together to figure this out and make Madison County a safer place? And they signed on. It wasn't that difficult to get people to sign on, because who doesn't want to make their community a safer place, right? We were fortunate. We got that grant from the Office of Violence Against Women, and we went to work. We sat down and put the working team together. Every agency sent a representative, someone who had the director's ear or whatever. And we sat down with our policies and we started to review our own policies and how we work with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And, and we compared it to the blueprint model that Praxis had. And some things we found, that we were doing and we're doing kind of well, and other things we found that just weren't working so well in our system, not individuals. And that was key. We didn't want to focus on individuals doing things wrong or great, but we wanted to look at our system as a whole, where it was fragmented, where it was not great. And once we looked at our own policies, we allowed each other to look at each other's policies and just kind of check mark what was working and what wasn't. And what we found was that we just weren't super at communicating. And Jen, if I leave anything out, please chime in, or if I say it incorrectly. But we found that we weren't great at communicating, what we were doing at our own agencies. We found that we just weren't sharing that information with one another super well. And when we learned that, we all kind of had like an aha moment, like, we can fix this. It doesn't have to be this way, and we can fix it. And we sat out with Praxis International to write a new community policy. So it's a community policy. The Blueprint for Safety is a community policy on how we address the crime of domestic violence. And each agency in this one collective policy has their own section of their roles and their responsibilities, and how we're collecting information that kind of takes the pressure off of the victims to be witnesses in trials or whatever, but how we're collecting information, what information is best to collect, and then how do we share it with the next person in that chain, right? To make sure that they have everything that they need to do their jobs efficiently and well, and how they can share what they've collected with that next person, ultimately with prosecution, and then the information that the judge has in order to make, a proper ruling or whatever. And once we were able to do that and we formed these relationships in this team, a lot of things came pretty simple after that, like figuring out how we're going to implement Marsy's law in our community. We regularly meet now to do case reviews because we're constantly monitoring ourselves to make sure that we are living up to Blueprint standards. And if we're not, we're adjusting and tweaking, hopefully, and providing some trainings, interagency trainings with one another, and it works for us. And I feel like that we are addressing the crime of domestic violence better at our courts, but I also feel like that the victim's voice is being heard more. And Jennifer could probably speak more to that because I do a lot of coordinating, but she's really the boots on the ground. And so she probably could speak more to that and what victims feel like is happening now that we've implemented the blueprints somewhat.
I think the biggest difference I noticed in my conversations with victims, of course, in our office, we prosecute the felony crimes for Clark and Madison County. So by the time it gets to us, a fair amount of time has passed. And then because of COVID, of course, there for a time there wasn't a grand jury, and there's still not in-person court. So everybody's struggling with this. A lot of time can pass before a case makes it through the court system and gets resolved. And so the biggest thing that Marsy's law has helped with in the past year is that when I speak to the victims, even though some time has passed, they don't feel like they've been left out of the process because somebody from every agency along the way has been talking to them about their rights and what they can expect, what's going to happen next for them. So, they're not as frustrated and strung out and ready to give up when they get to me. And for that, I'm very thankful. The unique thing about the blueprint, the thing that I love the most about it, besides the fact that we all work really well together, is that it has alleviated so much of the focus on needing the victim's testimony to prosecute these cases. The 911 calls are worth their weight in gold. And our 911 coordinator is a part of the blueprint team. So, if we need a 911 call, we can get it. And you can get more good information from that call than you can imagine. So, our focus is not so much on the victims having to testify, which is sometimes the last. They would rather give up completely and let the case be dismissed than have to testify. And so I think the blueprint has made it so they don't necessarily, so the whole case doesn't hinge on them showing up.
That's great. One of the things that you said, Jennifer, reminds me of something, Brittany, that you have shared with me about trials taking a longer time or being postponed, or just in general, the length of trials, and a recent motion that was filed on behalf of a victim. Would you mind to talk about that?
Yeah, it's we have a trial date in a case, but the prosecutor did file a motion to assert the victim's right to proceedings free from unreasonable delay, and we're still kind of waiting for what that means. And I think that I don't know what the court will say about it, but the victim's family in that case, I think, felt very appreciative and very heard, and important just because that, was filed. So I think that was meaningful for them.
And how long have they been in the system? Their case, it was like
six years.
So this is I think a really good example of what that looks like. That we would get that question a lot from folks of, free from unreasonable delay. When can that happen? What does that look like? When you have a family that has been going through this process for 6 years, that's probably the time that it can be filed. And I think you're exactly right, Brittany, that the being seen, right? Being seen in filing that motion, that is absolutely a gift, right? That's I keep thinking about Ava's language, but it is to be able to be seen and be validated in that way. I think is really important. So we only have a few more minutes left, so I'll just kind of open it to any sort of last burning things that you want to share. Biggest change that you've seen, things that you want to make sure that folks across the Commonwealth that they know. I'll just sort of open it.
Yeah, and I'd like to go first because I saw an applause in the chat, and it really resonated that I wanted to do that reaction applause many times from some of the things that you all have said. So just kind of know that we're hearing you, and thank you for the person in the chat who gave that applause. But another thing that we haven't talked about, I mentioned how Marsy's law is interconnected with so many other things, but I want to touch on how we've also been able to reference it in other state legislative initiatives. So for example, we know that Marsy's law was passed by a majority of the voters, and it was also passed almost unanimously by the legislature. So we know that this is something that folks believe in here. And with that being said, when there are other issues being brought up in the legislature, such as like campus rights for students who are in college, we really want to make sure that this premise of Marsy's law doesn't get watered down in these other initiatives. So what we've been able to do is say, hey, let's not forget about what Marsy's law stands for and how important it is to Kentuckians. So when we're addressing these issues where victims' rights should also be present and meaningful, let's also make sure that they are incorporated into these other initiatives, so these other bills in particular. So that's one where we have been able to say, hey, don't forget about this. And it matters. We have been effective in getting some substantial rights for victims in some of these campus bills that have been coming through our legislature. So I just want to, again, it's so much bigger than just this Marsy's law itself. It can play in so many different areas.
I love that, Layla. And really it's the values, right? I think that's such an important way of thinking about it, that passing Marsy's law was Kentuckians' way of saying we value this, that this matters, that victims matter. And so to think about that kind of at large, I think is a really neat approach. Anyone else? Other kinds of last thoughts or comments?
I'll give a parting thought. I was at a national conference recently in Orlando and had the opportunity to talk to somebody from Marsy's Law National, and she gave me some wisdom because I tend to get bogged down in the details of how we're going to implement this, what are the remedies, what does this mean? And she just reminded me that it's a movement and a process, and that it's we just can't become complacent, and we always have to be looking for opportunities to do better. And so that has been really helpful for me in thinking about all of this, to not get stressed out about it, and kind of just look at the big picture. And so I thought I would pass along that wisdom to others.
I appreciate that also, because I appreciate the shout out to our Marsy's Law National folks. We are obviously still here on the ground. I am here on the ground and happy to do what I can to help support folks. So please reach out to me, and we can give trainings, we can do information sessions, help connect you to folks who are doing different things. But we also have a terrific Marsy's Law National team as well. So sometimes we get questions from folks who will say, do you have an example of what this has looked like in another state? And so we'll get you connected with somebody. So absolutely, anytime you run into questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here, we're here to help make this happen as smoothly and meaningfully as we can.
Oh,
Denise?
I'll just say real quick, a shout out, just coming off that, Emily, you definitely do. You connected us with Arizona Attorney General's office. And so yeah, you are definitely the connector. We appreciate that. But then the other two shout outs I'd say is, I think what everyone heard the most today is when we're talking about being heard. So first, to the people who are in the community-based victim services, like Layla and all of our partners at the domestic violence centers, and all those, just everybody doing that great work. You know, I think you all are a huge part of that. And, you know, while Marsy's Law sort of, the language is more directed at the criminal system, I think our friends and partners, that's a big part of that, is the services that are provided to them there. So I think it's just more expansive than just, you know, being heard in court. Second, though, to, you know, the law enforcement officers and victim advocates and prosecutors and judges and court personnel and everybody else in the system, I think being heard, it's important to remember, especially for the reluctant folks who probably aren't listening on this, but is that being heard means, usually I think, means feeling empowered, which then means becoming engaged, and becoming engaged often means offender accountability. And that's a cool thing. So in the end, the community, not just the victim, is receiving, you know, a huge benefit from that. So that's my last words. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Jennifer, anything from you?
Well, I think, I'm sorry, Jay. I think all I want to say is really, like, sometimes I think we tend to just overcomplicate things, you know, when we're talking about implementing something new or making it hard. And I think when you came to talk with us in Madison County, I think you eased our minds a little bit about how uncomplicated this really can be. And you know, I just always believe that if you can get agencies together, if you can get people to work together, anything can be accomplished. So, you know, I encourage agencies just to meet as a team and decide what Marsy's Law and distribution of Marsy's Law and implementation looks like in your community. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be complicated.
I love that. I love that. And this has been a very celebratory and you know, positive session today, as it should be. And there's a lot to celebrate, and there's a lot to highlight and to shout out about. That's not to say that it hasn't had its challenges. So if you're sitting there watching and you're saying, okay, this has not been my experience, come be part of the team, right? Exactly as you said, Jennifer, that so much of this is about kind of the systems-based approach, collaborating, connecting. You don't have to figure this out on your own. So there are lots of different places across the state that we can get you connected to. Obviously, the Attorney General's office is kind of a central hub there. So please know that if you are feeling maybe not as celebratory right now, that you don't have to go through this alone. This is absolutely a paradigm shift. It's a systems shift, and we're excited to be walking through this with you. Jennifer?
I just want to say thanks for letting us be a part of it. I appreciate the work that you all do. We couldn't do what we do without the help from all of you. I think I've probably called the office of every single one of you at some point because I needed help. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, all of you, for being here, and to all of our attendees for being here as well. Again, I know how valuable your time is, and so I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today to be able to share this. If there's any questions that folks have that come up during this, or if you are going to rewatch this afterwards, because we did record it, so we will put it on our website. So please feel free to share it with your colleagues who weren't able to make it today. Refer back to whatever information you learned today that you might need to. We are just absolutely thrilled that a year later, here we are, and there is so much to celebrate and so much amazing things that have happened. So, you know, I think so much about, I'll get emotional. I think so much about the survivors who fought for this. it's working. Right, it's pretty cool. Okay, with that, we'll send a follow-up email that will give you any other information that I was supposed to give right now before I did this. So thank you all for being here. Thank you. And we will be in touch.